This week, we're taking a detour into Jewish humor, specifically an Instagram meme account called Jewish Girl Problems that has almost 51,000 followers. The account is run by Ali Silverberg, a 23-year-old Canadian Jew who agreed to sit down and talk to me all about it, from the page itself to staying funny in difficult times. I'm Lev Gringaus, and welcome to The Jews Are Tired, your podcast about Jewish news. So to those of you wondering, isn't this a Jewish news podcast, not a Jewish talk to people about Instagram podcast? Let me just quickly explain why I was so interested to speak with Ali Silverberg. When we're talking about news or what's happening in the world, it's sometimes too easy to get caught up in just the details of the thing, as opposed to diving into how this thing actually affects people. And one of the main measures, I think, of how people are processing what they're living through is humor, which, for Jews, humor is pretty much ingrained as part survival mechanism to get through hard times, and part the living, breathing cultural language of our people. And having a Jewish comedy meme Instagram page geared towards young Jews that has almost 51,000 followers feels like a pretty good place to start when asking how Jews, in this case specifically young Jews, are processing what's happening in the world with the pandemic and civil rights unrest, and just generally processing their place as young Jews in this world. So that was the original kind of drive of talking to Silverberg. But there's a lot more to this conversation than just that. In full disclosure, I follow Jewish Girl Problems on Instagram, and I think it's one of the funniest things on the planet. So I was not going to pass up asking Silverberg about the page, how she finds funny stuff, and what is actually funny to young Jews. Which, this podcast being this podcast, also turned into a conversation about what Jewish professionals trying to engage young adult Jews can maybe learn from Jewish Girl Problems. Silverberg grew up heavily involved in the Toronto Reform community and was involved in Hillel in college and works full-time for a marketing agency. So she's got a lot of interesting things to say and the relevant background with which to say them. On one last note, if you enjoy this episode and like Jewish Girl Problems on Instagram, and were thinking you want Jewish Girl Problems merchandise, Silverberg was kind enough to give this podcast the exclusive news that merchandise is indeed on its way. So I don't know about anybody else, but I've definitely got a new addition to my treat yourself shopping list. Back to the podcast. Our conversation has been lightly edited for length and clarity. Enjoy. The first question that I want to ask you, sort of the mandatory big first question. What is the story behind Jewish Girl Problems? How did it come into being? What did you imagine the Insta would be for? And how did it get to 50,000 followers?
Yeah, so honestly, I don't think the story is as interesting as everyone hopes it would be when they ask me. But basically, I was interning at the marketing agency that I now work at full time in the summer of 2018. And we base a lot of our marketing efforts in influencer marketing. So I was learning a lot about that and the process while I was working there. And I was doing some research, I think, for a jewelry campaign, for what we call theme pages, which are, Instagram pages with higher followings, but they aren't necessarily personalities or faces behind it. So a Jewish Girl Props or beige cardigan or that sort of thing, there's no personality behind it, just memes and reposts and stuff like that. So I was doing some research for female-centric ones, and I was thinking, what does Jewish Girl Probs even look like? I just assumed that it existed. So I looked it up, and it was sorry, this page doesn't exist. And I was oh, okay. And my colleagues were do it, Ali, oh my God, you're perfect for this, social media, Jewish, you're the most Jewish person. And I was okay, why not? So I grabbed the handle, and I figured even if I didn't start it right away, I would have it in my back pocket. But then I started talking to some friends about it and started making some content just about, experiences that I've seen in my life, or even just Jewish girl tropes, turning them into memes that I made myself and using images, just that circulate online. And that was sort of the start of the content. I was talking to some friends, but I was very deliberate in how I started to grow the page just because I've had a lot of experience in social media, even like before working full time. I did a lot of it for, like Jewish Youth Movement and for my Hillel and things like that. And especially while I was working there, I was just learning tips and tricks and tactics about the industry. So within the first few days, once I had like a bit of content that I thought was decent on the page, I went to every single Instagram page that was a Hillel, Jewish sorority, camp, every BBYO chapter, every Nifty chapter, basically any Jewish page that existed on Instagram. And I followed every single girl. So that's how it started. And that's, I think, the really only the hardest effort I've put into gaining the followers. And from there, it was like organic phone tree reach. Like one person sent some content to a few friends. And since then, I haven't really had to do much from there. It really, the content luckily speaks for itself.
And what was like the growth curve like? Because I follow the page unashamedly. I love it. And I feel like I only ran into it either at the beginning of this year or like last year around like July-ish. So like what was that curve of growth like of really?
It's really been decently sustained, surprisingly. What I find is over the Jewish holidays, when content is like the most relevant and the most relatable, my followers will spike. And then during some downtime, like especially not this summer, but other summers when a lot of kids are at camp or there's just, not as many holidays going on, it doesn't grow as exponentially. But yeah, definitely over the last 2 years, it's been a pretty upwards trend. It slowed down a little bit during the pandemic, actually. I thought it would be the opposite effect. But we still hit 50K during the pandemic, so I was happy about that. We still grow every day, some days more than others, but again, it just depends what content I put out that day. If it really resonates with people, it gets shared a bunch of times and reaches more people, and that's how I gain more followers. If I don't post anything that day, or if it just didn't resonate with anyone, then we don't see as much growth. But yeah, 2 years.
So then, this is going to sound like a really clinical question, but what is funny for young Jews? And I'm asking not just like in a general sense, but to be weirdly serious about an Instagram account with memes. There's like a typical old-timey sort of Northern American Jewish humor that fills, a lot of books and a lot of classic movies. And it feels like Jewish Girl Problems is part of this like creation of a new North American Jewish kind of humor. And I'm wondering how you see that or define it and like how that works into the Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, I'm used to having these conversations because I work in the space professionally. So I talk about memes to CMOs and, people who have never heard of a meme before. And I try to make it seem like a serious, profitable area for them. So I'm used to it. But to go back to your question, I totally understand, traditional, when I say traditional as in like 20th century Jewish humor, we still have stand-up comics and, that still make their way into popular media and they're still hilarious. And I think that Gen Z still finds it funny, but the biggest thing that they find funny is that if it relates to them. And I don't think that has changed from generation to generation. It's really just, finding experiences that people thought they were alone in having and then finding out they're not alone. Like memorizing your Torah portion and then remembering it 13 years later, or thinking people at camp are better looking than they are in the city. It's, it really ranges from a variety of topics. And I mean, a lot of it just comes from, my personal experience because, I'm a white Ashkenazi Reformed Jew who lives in Toronto, and I can only do so much to, share the same lived experience as everybody else. But I try to keep it as general as possible because I want as many people to relate to it as possible. So really the ones that my content that people find the most funny or does well is stuff that everyone has related to. So again, if it's a bat mitzvah post, not everyone has had a bat mitzvah. If it's birthright or camp, not everyone has been on birthright or been to camp. So people still find it funny. It's just may not be all 50,000 people. It may just be a fraction. So it really is all about relatability and also, I guess, tapping into internet trends. You know, there's always a different like trend on Twitter, like a format for a joke per se. Like, there was one a week ago or a few weeks ago that was, so-and-so says, I know a spot, and then takes you to blank. And when I post something like that, I just kind of, you know, I relate it to something Jewish, and my parents are like, where did that joke format come from? Like, I don't get it, but it was circulating on Twitter. It was circulating on the internet. I kind of just took that format, related it to something Jewish. I said, Jewish girls be like, I know a spot, and then take you to where they had their first kids at camp, which was probably one of the first things I could think of at the moment. And that did pretty well because, you know, it was a trend that people had been seeing that was being used not in a Jewish context. And then when they saw it in a Jewish context, it was even more funny because they're like, I'm Jewish. I relate to this. It's hilarious. So I think a lot of it has been that, like, seeing traditional memes from pages that have millions of followers and then becoming more personalized to them. And I know that was a really long rant with a lot of information, but that was kind of my spiel.
No, that's great. That's exactly like the kind of thing that I want to ask you about. And also sort of piggybacking off of that, actually, you have sort of hit the secret sauce of engaging young adult Jews, which I know Jewish professionals as like a group of people have such a headache about all the time. And you mentioned this idea of like relatability and like understanding the fact that some content is not going to hit everybody all at once. And so I'm wondering if you can, you know, maybe say more about what you've learned through doing this page, and learning about that kind of relatability aspect, and what maybe, you know, the Jewish world as a whole can learn about how to do young adult Jewish engagement and also how not to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this a lot, even before Jewish Girl Probs, because, you know, if you're a Jewish professional, you've seen that youth involvement is just on a really scary decline that hasn't been seen in a really long time. So, you know, there are people who reach out to me, like you asked, and how do you do it? You know, why didn't you do this when you were in our youth group? Or, you know, I tried. But the biggest thing is that what I've noticed is in Jewish spaces, we continue to segment ourselves and we keep splitting ourselves up instead of bringing us together. And you're wondering, why doesn't our movement have 50,000 people? Why doesn't our, you know, niche Jewish page have 50,000 followers? It only has 5,000 followers. You have those 5,000 really engaged followers, but you're segmenting yourself from a really vast, large Jewish community, which is something I've learned a lot about because, again, I kind of lived in a Reform Jewish bubble for a long time. And I have a lot of followers that are Orthodox, they're conservative, they're, you know, even modern Orthodox or like any other sect I had never even heard of. And sometimes they'll message me and just open my eyes to something that I'd been, I wouldn't say ignorant's not the right word, but yeah, that if I was ignorant to certain things before and I take those things in stride, I tell my followers, you know, about my background and who I am, but just learning how to bring people together instead of splitting them apart. Because when the way I like to phrase it is we see ourselves as like hundreds of different sects of Judaism, yet we are one of the world's smallest religions. And when non-Jews hear the word Jewish, they think of all of us. They don't think of Reform Jews. They don't think of Orthodox Jews. They think of Jews, period. They don't know the difference. So when we don't stand together, that's when we start to hurt what we're trying to promote or how we're trying to stand together. And I think I've kind of segued a little bit from your question. But one of the biggest things I've learned that we can kind of take into account is making things accessible for everyone and not just one certain way of practicing Judaism. And I know that another big thing that I get all the time on my comments, even like I saw an hour ago, people feel so guilty for not being, quote, Jewish enough. And it's something that really makes me sad because, you know, I've lived a very engaged Jewish life, but I'm not going to go tell somebody I'm a better Jew than you are because I had a bat mitzvah. I'm a better Jew than you are because I went on birthright, or I went to sleepover camp. And it does upset me if I'm propagating those stereotypes from, posting camp jokes, posting jokes about, different Jewish experiences. But I just try to educate people who come to me, or just comfort them and let them know that, there's no one way to be a Jew, and that any way that they think is meaningful is valid, which is my personal belief. And I think that's something really valuable and important that Jewish professionals can bring to their work, is just making everyone feel valid in any way that they feel, because there are certain practices that may feel exclusionary for some people and that sort of thing. So again, who knew that a meme page would turn into all of this? But what people don't see is the DMs and the messages that I get from people. And I've had these conversations, and I've almost turned into some sort of a resource for people without asking for it. And I'm glad that I have the tools and the knowledge to help them. But I wish that there were, places that I could send them that weren't like 50 different pages and me be like, go figure out what you want to do.
So to narrow that down a little bit, like when you're talking about, because it seems like sort of the mechanism aspect of what you're talking about is having all of these different memes and posts and jokes that some of them are geared towards this group, some of them are geared towards another group. Are you like consciously sorting through the content that you have and saying, okay, we're posting a little bit too much about like Jewish summer camps and, birthright, let's do some posts about this other thing? Like, how do you sort that out on sort of the real life level of the page?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I wish I could say that I had the time to come up with a content schedule and all of my posts in advance, which is what I do for clients and what I would tell professionals to do. But because this isn't, unfortunately, my full-time job, a lot of it comes out on a whim. Like, I'll make the post or find it like a few minutes before I post it, just because that's the way it has to be sometimes. But I am aware of, the topics that I'm posting and how often I'm posting about something. And if I'm not personally aware about it, then someone will make me aware, because, people, one, like, I'm glad they like to engage with the page, and two, they care about it enough that they want to see certain things, and that makes me happy. So I'm always happy to have those conversations with them and make sure that, my content isn't for me. It's for 50,000 people now, right? So, I'm a natural people pleaser, and I know that you can't please everybody, which has been another lesson that I've learned running this page. But yeah, I will make sure that, the experiences and the topics that we're talking about are, not too much about camp one day, or not too much about having bat mitzvah or birthright or bagels, especially. I grew up thinking bagels were like the most Jewish food ever, but like, obviously they're not for a lot of Jews. So it's just sort of things like that where I remind people again about my personal background, but keeping in mind that, people want to see what they want to see, and I want to put a good face towards my audience.
So you've mentioned a little bit about this of like finding content and people sending you things that then you post, but can you sort of say a little bit more about your process for either finding or creating? Because some of it is like, okay, screenshots from Jewish Twitter, but you also have like a lot of original memes and content, everything from quippy lines like, did you go to Jewish sleepover camp or are you normal? Which I loved, to like when Bubby calls to tell you she found you the perfect Jewish boy to date, and it's posted over a photo of the baboon with the cell phone from mid 2000s. Like, how are you creating a lot of the original content? Is it really just people send you stuff and you sort through? Like, how do you find these pieces of gold? That's the question.
A lot of it actually doesn't get sent to me from people I don't know. Once in a while, maybe, people like to just bring stuff to my attention that I haven't seen. But my process in terms of like a meme where, there's something written with a picture, like a classic style meme like that, is that over the last 2 years, I've compiled a repository of the pictures, the meme pictures themselves without the words. So I call them meme templates. And I have this giant repository of all the pictures, and it's in an iCloud folder. So on Apple has a program where you can, share things with people, So it's in this giant photo album, and I have some of my friends on the album, and you have the ability to comment things. So a decent amount of my friends are on the album. Not everybody's constantly on it. Again, it's not their job to help me come up with content, But, you know, when people are bored, if they have an idea or if they see I posted a picture and something just sparks an idea, they may just leave some comments on some of the pictures and it may inspire me to create something, or I'll use something of them and give them of theirs and give them the credit. So a lot of it comes from that. Like, I'll find these pictures, look at the picture for a little bit and be like, what can I do with this? And sometimes I just need to bounce ideas off of friends to, you know, come up with the right wording or the right topic about what I want to do. But yeah, I scour the internet for these pictures. I'm on Reddit, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Tumblr, I'm on obviously I'm every social media platform. And when I see a picture, I'll grab it. And over the years, that's worked out pretty well. So shout out to some of my lovely friends who helped me come up with this content. So a lot of the original memes that you see came up that way. And then if it's an original tweet, you know, it may just be something I'm thinking about, or I see, again, like I mentioned, one of those like trends on Twitter where it's like a joke format, and then it's pretty easy to like fill in the blanks with a Jewish experience. And then, yeah, like you mentioned, Jewish Twitter is a really, really, really awesome space with some really great people, some super niche people. If you don't follow anyone on Jewish Twitter, I highly recommend doing so because they're awesome. And a lot of them support my page. I always ask permission when I want to post something so I can make sure that, you know, the right owner of the content's credited and things like that. And that's pretty much it. And same with TikTok. If I see a Jewish TikTok I think is funny, I'll leave a comment for the creator asking if I can post it or what their handle is that I can credit. 99% of the time it's okay. The other 1%, they say that their parents don't know they have TikTok, so I can't post it. But yeah, that's pretty much the process. A lot of it is not as planned as I think people would like to know. But it still works. So no complaints.
So then to sort of get a little bit more serious and meta again about the page, one of the things I've been sort of wondering about with the little brain function that I've left nowadays, is humor and staying funny during the pandemic. I mean, we are living in definitely unfunny times in so many ways. And like some classic comedians like Jerry Seinfeld basically just checked out and said in interviews like, not in the mood to be funny. And, you know, there's this weird thing where I think all of us need humor, especially in times like these, but it also feels a little bit grotesque and wrong sometimes to like laugh and not feel terrible even for just like a hot sec. And following Jewish Girl Problems, it felt like the Instagram page and the humor just took everything in stride and kept being funny and poking fun at quarantine and drinking alone on Passover. And I'm wondering, like, how have you been pulling through with that? Like, is it hard to stay funny and keep the page running with like everything happening in the world right now? And how do you see, you know, then the role of Jewish humor right now?
It's something I've thought a lot about. Like you mentioned at the beginning, I think, you know, I was taking into consideration what other humorists on Instagram and on social media were doing and making sure I wasn't overstepping or, you know, going to offend too many people. You always offend somebody. But, you know, I think at first the jokes were pretty relatable. People were saying like, thank you so much for still posting. Like every time you post, it makes my day. I needed the laugh today. So I figured, you know, this is my job. It's kind of become my duty. I don't want, you know, to go rogue, go MIA and, you know, not help someone smile once in a day. So that's always been my main purpose, is just to bring smiles to people when they feel like they need it. But then obviously the unfortunate circumstances with George Floyd happened in the middle of quarantine, and social media turned upside down for a very good reason. And I think this has had more of an impact on my page than even the pandemic. I think we've all kind of gotten used to, you know, quarantine, pandemic, and at least in Canada, what's been going on. But, you know, when luckily more and more resources came out about the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of Jewish influencers, as in like, well, yes, influencers, but rabbis and Jewish professionals and people in the community started, you know, making these really great resources and messages about Judaism and the movement, and how we should be reacting and what we should be doing. So it put me in a bit of a weird place because personally, I've done a lot of work in the Jewish space and Jewish advocacy, volunteer work, and running youth programs, and it's all rooted in social justice and advocacy. But on the other hand, then I run a meme page that's solely rooted in humor. So it was really hard to try to find a balance between the two, because I didn't want to lose the following that I was trying to use to my advantage to, share resources. I didn't want to lose them by overwhelming them, but I also couldn't stay silent. So I did pause for a little bit. Like, again, I kind of, saw what other people were doing. I wasn't going to overstep. I put out some messages that I personally stand behind, and shared a lot of resources from the Jewish community. I led a lot of people to a page called Alma, like Hey Alma on Instagram. They're a really great Jewish resource with the editorial staff behind them to do the research and to write those articles and to provide information. The biggest problem was that I'm one 23-year-old who still works full-time in a marketing agency, and people were coming to me. So I was leading them to other resources, but I didn't want to become what people thought was an expert in the space, because I'm not, and it wouldn't be fair to call myself one. So a lot of it was resharing posts and giving as many resources to lead to other places as possible, and answering messages, making sure that people were aware of who I was, what my background was, what I could do differently on the page. And it kind of went on from there. And I think, not that there was ever a back to normal. There were people who may have accused, like, if I start to post a joke, there are going to be people who say, how could you go back to normal? If I stop posting, there are people who are saying, why are you turning into something different? So again, it was a very fine line to walk, and I'm personally happy with the way I handled it. And I think obviously over the last few weeks, there have been a lot of changes in, thinking about what I post before I post it, and who's going to say what about it. How can it, affect somebody and their Jewishness? So I think it's had a really positive effect on the social media community and just the internet as a whole. But it was a very interesting situation to be a part of, and I think we learned a lot from it.
To expand sort of on this idea even more, when it comes to the underlying theme of the Instagram account, I want to ask you about, like, it's Jewish girl problems, not Jewish problems, not Jewish guy problems. And like, I'm sure a lot of people and different kinds of people follow the account. And you sort of hinted at this before, but the account is very centered around sort of a feminist voice and very, very much around Jewish women. And I'm wondering if you have any big thoughts on what that means in context of, like, Jewish women in, I guess, classic Jewish North American humor being the butt of so many jokes, like the ostensibly funny stereotypes of the Jewish American princess, the neurotic Jewish woman, which nowadays there's sort of a conversation about those stereotypes are rooted in a lot of sexism and how the Jewish community should, like, be funny with those things. So, I would love to hear more from you. Are you, like, how are you consciously navigating that? Or is it just like, you're just a Jewish woman running a meme page and that's just the whole thing and that's the way it is? Like, how do those things come together for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually never thought about your question as much as probably other things, because I was raised in such an egalitarian community where, I had my bat mitzvah at 13. I read from the Torah. I led the service. I did my Devar Torah. I did the Haftorah. I did the whole 9 yards, but it's not as common of an experience as I've learned from running the page. And, a lot of my content is relatable to, obviously, people of all genders and identities. And I've had conversations with people who don't identify on the gender binary, and about, where I can do things differently. But at the end of the day, I took the handle Jewish girl problems, so that kind of puts me in a bit of a pigeonhole, right? So I think a lot of it kind of frames my content around, like, my personal female experience, but so many people take it in stride or take it in the way they want to interpret it. Like, even today I posted about remembering your bat mitzvah portion, but there are, male followers commenting on it about their bar mitzvah. It's just, wording about the way that I write it because I'm Jewish girl probs, and then everyone kind of takes it in stride. I could have written B'nai Mitzvah, but again, it wasn't like, grammar wise didn't work out that way. But I think a lot of it just helps with simplifying the language. And yeah, I've never really thought about women being the butt of the joke. It's something that you kind of have my mind racing about, because it's definitely something that you don't see as often anymore in contemporary media, because obviously you still see it. It's just not as common. And, the Jewish American princess or Jap stereotype still exists, and I don't want to be one to, keep hammering it in. So I try to be conscious of that. But at the same time, I also relay personal experiences, and it's important for everyone to know that that's where it comes from. And a lot of it is me making fun of myself, making fun of my own life experiences. And I don't, my intention is never to hurt a community of people or to offend a community of people. But yeah, it can be hard to navigate, but it's something I try not to ruminate on, because if you think about it too hard, it'll just destroy you, right? So, and it's the same with all of these things, with the pandemic, with Black Lives Matter, with everything. How many things can you ruminate on before you can't do it anymore? And I've been to those places. Not every day is a good day running the page. So yeah, there's a lot to think about. But at the end of the day, if I need to put out a lot of content to get my followers there, I can't spend hours on it either. So I guess that's the easy way out of your question, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Interesting. So then to bring things back into somewhat more lighthearted territory, you've got over 50,000 followers. You've also got a Facebook group, right?
Yeah, a small one. It's not super active. I want to, start it up again, but again, Facebook's not exactly the medium of choice for a lot of people anymore. So there's that. Yeah.
Right. But, you're cranking out content, and I'm sort of wondering, do you have a master plan for what you're doing or going to do with this platform? Because it's interesting that, you mentioned this is sort of a volunteer, fun thing, but now you feel a sense of responsibility towards it. And, 50,000 people now see you as sort of the master Jew, being able to help them navigate the weird Jewish things that are happening in the world. Where is there a master plan?
I wouldn't say there's a master plan. I would say I am always thinking about the future. And even when we hit 10,000 followers, I knew, okay, this can be something. And when, I started having those conversations with people, like you mentioned, I started to realize what was actually happening, and that, I felt equipped enough to be able to handle it. The plan is to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm always, looking for opportunities to expand and amplify and, create new content. But you have first exclusive that there is merchandise in the works.
Hey,
yeah.
Awesome.
It actually will hopefully be launching relatively soon. It's pretty much ready to go, but I'm just waiting for some fulfillment to shorten because of COVID. Not many people know that, so you get first exclusive rights of Jewish Girl Props merch. But yeah, I really want to see what happens with that, because, it's not anything I've ever done before. So, it could sell a couple things and be nice, or who knows, it could take off. I could become a millionaire and move out of the house. So never know what the master plan could be, but a lot of it is just taking key learnings and, figuring out what to do next as it goes, because it's so hard to make a master plan on anything social media related, because it changes every day. No one knew that George Floyd was going to spark a global movement, and no one knew that the US was going to have a takedown of Chinese apps like TikTok, and, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So a lot of it is just learning what happened yesterday and implementing it tomorrow and seeing what happens. And, even Instagram gives great insights into what's doing well and what's not. And I take that into consideration in the future. My content's definitely evolved over the last 2 years. It's not the same as my first few posts, and, in 2 years, it's not going to look the same either. But the plan is to keep doing what I'm doing. And, it's not my full-time job. So I like to keep it as a side hustle. I can't say I imagine myself becoming CEO of Jewish Girl Props Inc. in the next 5 years. I still like to do the work that I'm doing and helping, other clients as well. But yeah, I don't see it going away anytime soon. And, maybe we'll reach that 100K one day. Who knows?
That's awesome. So the last question I have for you then is, what's your favorite Jewish joke or piece of content humor thing that you've posted on the page?
Oh my God. I don't think I can even, it changes all the time because I don't even think I could choose just one. There's obviously stuff that I notice other people like a lot, and there's stuff that I think is hilarious that nobody likes, like especially the biblical jokes, like jokes about biblical stories and biblical figures I think are hilarious, but nobody else likes. That's definitely a Jewish Twitter niche that I love following. I don't think I can, without pulling up my phone, I don't think I can pull out just one. But for whoever's listening, if you haven't seen the page, I would recommend scrolling as far as you can and finding all of them.
Fantastic. Well, I'm all out of questions, but like really, I mean, thank you so much, Ali, for like being willing to sit down and speak with me for this podcast.
It was my pleasure. I'm always happy to, and you know, I try to talk to everybody that reaches out to me. I do my best, so it's my pleasure, and I love doing it.
This has been this week's The Jews Are Tired podcast. I'm Lev Gringaus. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and hopefully next week the Jews will get some rest. The Jews Are Tired is a product of Jewfolk Inc. For more information, go to tcjewfolk.com or email the show at podcast@tcjewfolk.com.